Today we're going to be working on lesson 29, which is found on page 148 of your text. In this lesson, we're going to be multiplying fractions. Let's go ahead and get started. In lesson 29, we're multiplying fractions. Now, let's go ahead and look at what we mean when we multiply fractions. Look at example number 1. In example number 1, we want to know what fraction is 1/2 of 3/4. Well, what that means is that I've got 3/4 of a whole. And 3/4 of a whole looks something like this. And I'll lay it on my red pieces so that you can see it a little bit better. So this is 3/4. And I want to know when would I have half of that? Okay? Well, notice that if I take each of my fourths and I divide them up into halves, like so, it would take 3 of my 1/8 pieces to have half of my 4th piece, my 3/4. So then we would say that 1/2 of 3/4 is 3/8. Because it takes 3/8 in order to cover half of 3/4. Well, notice that if I take 1/2 and multiply it to 3/4, when I'm multiplying fractions, I multiply the numerators together. 1 times 3 is 3, and I multiply my denominators together. 2 times 4 is 8. So 1/2 times 3/4 is equal to 3/8. Well, see, the word of in math implies multiplication. So when you see 1/2 of 3/4, that means to multiply, and that's how you can find your solution. Okay, let's look at example 2. With example 2, it says multiply 3/4 times 2/3. Well, this means that I have 2/3, and I want to know what 3/4 of the 2/3 would be. To find that out, I multiply my numerator. Well, 3 times 2 is 6, and I multiply my denominator. 4 times 3 is 12, and I can reduce that fraction to 1/2. So 3/4 times 2/3 is equal to 6 over 12, and since 6 is half of 12, 6/12 reduces to 1/2. Let's look at example 3, where we have 4 times 2/3. Well, to do this particular problem, we can say that 4 can be rewritten as 4 over 1, and then multiply by 2/3. 4 times 2 is 8, and 1 times 3 is 3, so that's 8/3. Well, consider what 4 times 2/3 means. That means 2/3 added to itself 4 times. And wouldn't that be 8/3? Well, then we convert this to a mixed number by taking 8 and dividing it by 3. 3 goes into 8 2 whole times with 2 remaining. So that's 2 and 2/3. So this would be the mixed number 2 and 2/3. Okay, let's look at example 4. In example 4, we're told that 3 pennies placed side by side as shown below, or 3 pennies are placed side by side as shown below. So we're going to take 3 pennies and place them side by side. And each penny has a diameter of 3/4 inches. So each of these pennies has a diameter of 3/4 of an inch. And we want to know how long is the row of pennies. So there's 2 ways we could find this. We could either take 3/4 and add it to itself 3 times, or we could multiply 3/4 by 3. Well, 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 9, so this is 9/4. Or we could just put this over 1 and say 3 times 3 is 9, and this also is 9/4. So either way you do it, you'll get the same result. We're going to convert to a mixed number, and it's 2 1/4. So 9/4 is 2 1/4. So 2 1/4 inches is going to be the length of this particular row of pennies. Now what we're going to do is start reducing fractions by dividing by a common factor. Remember that fraction 6/12 that we said was 1/2? Well, another way we could have shown that that was 1/2 was by dividing both numerator and denominator by the same factor. And since 6 divided by 6 is 1 and 12 divided by 6 is 2, we say that 6/12 reduces to 1/2. Now notice that with the fraction 6/12, I could have divided both numerator and denominator by 2 because both the numerator and denominator are divisible by 2. And 6 divided by 2 is 3 and 12 divided by 2 is 6. But notice that I just get another fraction that's equal to 1/2, and I can still reduce it further. 3 and 6 now can both be divided by 3 without leaving a remainder. And 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So again, this reduces to 1/2, only I had to do it in 2 steps. So when I'm trying to reduce a fraction, a helpful part of doing this, or something that's very helpful, is to look for the largest factor of both 6 and 12, or the greatest common factor. So when you reduce fractions, you really want to divide by the greatest common factor of the numerator and the denominator, so that you can reduce in one step rather than in more than one step. So look at example number 5, 8/12. Well, again, I could reduce this in either one step or two. If I reduce by the greatest common factor, which is 4, I would reduce in one step. 8 divided by 4 and 12 divided by 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2, 12 divided by 4 is 3. But notice that if I had only noticed that these two are both even and can be divided by 2, well, 8 divided by 2 is 4 and 12 divided by 2 is 6. I would have gotten 4/6, but that is a fraction that is equal to 2/3 because I can divide again by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2 and 6 divided by 2 is 3. And I achieve the same result. Okay, let's look at example 6. With example 6, I'm asked to multiply 2 times 5/12. Well, again, I'm going to place a 2 over a 1 and then multiply. 2 times 5 is 10, 1 times 12 is 12. These numbers are both even, so they both can be divided by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 12 divided by 2 is 6. So my final answer would be 5/6, and that's the reduced form of the answer. Look at example 7. There were 8 baseball bats and 12 baseball gloves in the bag. What was the ratio of bats to gloves in the bag? Well, there's 8 baseball bats and 12 baseball gloves. So 8 bats to 12 gloves is the ratio. But we want to reduce this ratio. And we would reduce by dividing by the greatest common factor, which is 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2, and 12 divided by 4 is 3. So 8/12 reduces to 2/3. So when you're reducing fractions, remember to reduce by dividing both numerator and denominator by the greatest common factor. Well, why don't you go ahead and try your practice problems and come back and we'll look at those together. Okay, so we're reducing fractions by dividing by the greatest common factor. And of course, we're learning to multiply fractions. Remember that when you multiply, you don't have to have a common denominator. All you do is multiply the numerator and the denominators together. Well, let's go ahead and try your practice problems and see how you did. Practice problem A. We're asked to multiply, then reduce. Well, 1/2 of 4/5 is the same thing as 1/2 times 4/5. And 1 times 4 is 4, and 2 times 5 is 10. To reduce, we would divide by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 5 divided by 2 is, or 10 divided by 2 rather, is 5. So your final product would be 2/5. Problem B, 1/4 of 2/3 is going to be the same thing as 1/4 times 2/3. And 1 times 2 is 2, and 4 times 3 is 12. We can reduce by dividing by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 12 divided by 2 is 6. So our reduced product would be 1/6. Problem C. 2/3 times 3/4. 2 times 3 is 6. 3 times 4 is 12. The greatest common factor of 6 and 12 is 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1. 12 divided by 6 is 2. So this reduces to 1/2. For problem D, we're asked to multiply, then convert each answer to an improper fraction, to a whole number, or to a mixed number. So 5/6 times 6/5. Well, 5 times 6 is 30, and 6 times 5 is 30. And if the numerator and denominator are the same, the fraction has a value of 1. Problem E, 5 times 2/3. Well, again, we put the 5 over a 1 and multiply. 5 times 2 is 10. 1 times 3 is 3. Now, we're going to do a shortened form of division. 3 goes into 10 3 whole times. And since 3 times 3 is 9, and 10 minus 9 is 1, our remainder would be 1. And so this would be 1/3. So we're basically just using short division in order to convert 10/3 to 3 1/3. And then for problem F, we have 2 times 4/3. So again, we change this to 2 over 1. 2 times 4 is 8, and 1 times 3 is 3. So let's use short division. 3 goes into 8 2 whole times. 2 times 3 is 6. 8 minus 6 is 2. So we have a remainder of 2 and a denominator of 3. So 2 2/3 would be my result. Now, if you're not comfortable with short division, remember that you can divide out to the side in order to convert. Okay, so don't be afraid to do that. Problem G, reduce each fraction. Well, 9 and 12 have a common factor of 3. So 9 divided by 3 and 12 divided by 3 would give me my reduced fraction. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. So the reduced fraction is 3/4. 6/10 have a common factor of 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So 3/5 would be my reduced fraction. And then 18/24 have a common factor of 6. 18 divided by 6 is 3, and 24 divided by 6 is 4. So this reduces to 3/4. Problem J. In a group of 30 children, there were 20 girls. What was the ratio of boys to girls? Well, if there were 20 girls out of 30 whole children, that means that there were 10 boys, because 30 minus 20 is 10. So the ratio of boys to girls would be 10 to 20. And 10 is half of 20, so therefore this ratio reduces to 1/2. So 10 out of 20 is the same thing as 1/2. And that's it. Well, have a wonderful day and enjoy your math, and I'll see you tomorrow.